Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer. Picture your grandmother for a moment. Maybe she's the type who won't let you leave without stuffing you full of food, who shows love through heaping plates and second helpings. Now imagine she survived nightmares you can barely fathom, escaping war with nothing but the clothes on her back, scrounging for anything edible, consuming things too awful to speak about just to see another sunrise. Fast forward decades. She's safe now, surrounded by family in a new country, yet she still hoards every scrap, clips coupons religiously, and sees every single meal as something far deeper than dinner. Each bite carries the weight of terror, dignity, gratitude, vengeance, history, and, most of all, love. This was Jonathan Safran Foer's grandmother, a woman who'd crown him the greatest chef who ever lived, for her simple chicken and carrots, whose entire relationship with food carried the gravity of her impossible survival. And it's this profound, almost sacred connection between food, family, and the narratives we build around them that pulses through the heart of his remarkable book, Eating Animals. Here's the thing. Foer wasn't setting out to write some activist manifesto. He wasn't a food scientist or campaigner. He was a novelist, someone who spent his days crafting imaginative stories. But everything shifted the moment he became a father. Watching his newborn son instinctively nurse just moments after entering the world, Foer felt this overwhelming connection rippling backward through generations. His parents watching him eat, his grandmother watching his mother eat. Suddenly, the simple act of feeding his child transformed into something monumental. This wasn't just about nutrition anymore. It was about the stories served alongside the food, the invisible threads binding families together and defining what they stand for. And that's when it hit him. He didn't actually know what meat was. Really was. Where did it come from? How were these animals actually living and dying? He dabbled in vegetarianism since age 9, ever since a babysitter casually mentioned she didn't eat chicken because, "I don't want to hurt anything." That simple sentence had burrowed into his mind, surfacing and disappearing over the years, creating what he calls this conscientious inconsistency in his diet. But now, with a tiny human depending on him, inconsistency felt like a cop-out. He needed the complete story, the unvarnished truth, behind every meal they'd share. What unfolded was a years-long, intensely personal, often gut-wrenching investigation into the hidden machinery of modern animal agriculture. Eating Animals isn't just another fact dump about food production. It's a story about what happens when someone finally decides to truly look at where their food originates, wrestling with tradition, pleasure, ethics, and the narratives we choose to live by. By the time we're done here today, you'll understand the invisible system delivering most meat to our tables. You'll hear voices from inside that system, both animal and human, and you'll grapple alongside Foer with this profound question: what does it actually mean to eat and to be an eating animal in our modern world? Jonathan Safran Foer's journey begins, as the most important journeys often do, not with some grand manifesto but with a quiet, persistent question gnawing at him. It started bubbling up while holding his newborn son. Suddenly, those abstract food choices he'd made throughout his life, the vegetarian phases inspired by that thoughtful babysitter, the returns to meat eating driven by taste or social convenience, felt flimsy, inadequate. Feeding his child carried more weight. This wasn't just about keeping him healthy. It was about the stories, the values, embedded in every meal. His mind kept returning to his grandmother, the Holocaust survivor for whom food was everything: survival, love, terror, history itself. Her legendary chicken and carrots, celebrated by the family as the work of the greatest chef who ever lived, wasn't just dinner. It was a story they told themselves, a narrative that defined who they were. Food, Foer realized, is never just food. It's memory, identity, culture, and ethics, all twisted together in ways we rarely acknowledge. So Foer asked himself, what story did he want to tell his son about their food? To answer that, he first needed to understand that story himself. Where does meat actually come from? Not the idyllic Red Barn farms from children's picture books, but the actual places producing the overwhelming majority. We're talking 99% of the meat Americans eat today. He assumed, like most people picking up a book about eating animals, that he knew the general outline, that this would be a fairly straightforward case for vegetarianism. But the reality he discovered was far more complex, disturbing, and deliberately hidden than he ever imagined. He tried the straightforward approach first, writing polite letters to major meat producers like Tyson Foods. He explained he was a new father, wanting to make informed decisions, asking to visit their facilities, speak with their people, understand how everything worked. The response? Silence. Complete radio silence. Doors were locked, not just physically, but institutionally. He learned that even prestigious research groups, like the Pew Commission, faced massive obstacles, with industry representatives allegedly threatening experts, research funding if they cooperated. The message couldn't be clearer. This system operates behind thick curtains of secrecy. And that secrecy itself became deeply unsettling for Foer. Why lock farm doors? It's not to keep animals in or thieves out. Those locked doors, he realized, captured the whole sad business. They suggested something worth hiding. So Foer took a different route. He connected with an animal activist he calls, quote, someone willing to step onto these farms in the dead of night, not as a journalist or inspector, but simply as a witness. His description of preparing for this clandestine visit practically vibrates with nervous energy. Black clothes, surgical booties, silenced phone, a copy of a penal code section about providing food and water to impounded animals tucked in his pocket. He's clearly uncomfortable, admitting, I'm not the kind of person who finds himself on a stranger's farm in the middle of the night. Their first visit takes them to a turkey farm. Following satellite photos, they sneak through an apricot grove, squeeze through barbed wire, and step onto ground that's basically a compost of animal waste, dirt, and I don't yet know what else. They find a shed, surprisingly lit up inside. Sliding open the heavy door reveals this strange, disorienting scene. Tens of thousands of turkey chicks, about fist-sized, nearly invisible against the sawdust floor, huddled under heat lamps instead of mothers. The air hums with machinery. Gas masks hang on the wall like some ominous decoration. At first glance, Foer admits, it doesn't look horrific. Crowded, sure, but the chicks seem cute enough. He feels this initial exhilaration, just seeing this hidden world. But the longer he looks, the more disturbing details emerge. The blackened ends of beaks and toes, red spots covering heads, and then the dead chicks. Everywhere. Some blood-matted, others covered in sores, some half-eaten by their companions, some clearly deformed. They're technically exceptions, but there are few places to look without seeing at least one. The defining moment comes when he finds C kneeling beside a chick, trembling on its side, eyes crusted shut, scabs covering bald patches, head shaking uncontrollably. He thinks C will know what to do, how to help. She does. She takes out a knife and swiftly, almost tenderly, ends its suffering, rescuing it, in the only way possible in that place. This act crystallizes the grim reality, a system where rescue often just means a quicker death. This hidden world, Foer explains, is factory farming. It's a term that's slippery to define precisely, but you know it when you see it. It's a system where animals, often by the hundreds of thousands, get treated not as living beings, but as production units. It's a mindset laser-focused on minimizing costs and maximizing output, systematically ignoring or externalizing inconvenient costs like environmental destruction, human health risks, and animal suffering. It considers nature itself an obstacle to overcome, and this system, Foer stresses, accounts for virtually all 99% of the land animals Americans eat. Foer then dives into the specific realities for different animals, often dissecting the misleading language the industry uses. Words like free range often mean essentially nothing. Maybe a small door offering theoretical access to a tiny dirt patch for thousands of birds. Natural means even less. He starts with chickens, revealing this bizarre reality that we've essentially created two completely different kinds: layers, bred for extreme egg production, and broilers, engineered for freakishly fast growth and oversized breasts. Broilers reach slaughter weight in about 6 weeks, a growth rate 400% faster than chickens just a few decades ago. Their bodies often can't handle it. Their bones deform, many struggle to walk, and some literally just die from conditions like sudden death syndrome, virtually unknown outside factory farms. And what about the male chicks born to egg-laying breeds? Since they can't lay eggs and weren't designed for meat production, they serve zero economic function. So over 250 million male chicks per year in the U.S. alone get destroyed almost immediately after hatching, sucked onto electrified plates, tossed into grinders while fully conscious, or suffocated in dumpsters. The lives of laying hens often get spent in battery cages, stacked in tiers inside windowless sheds. Each hen gets floor space roughly equivalent to a sheet of printer paper. They can't spread their wings, perch, dust bathe, or do anything remotely natural. The constant stress and crowding trigger aggression, which gets managed by searing off parts of their beaks without any pain relief. Even cage-free layers, while not in those specific cages, typically get crammed by the tens of thousands into sheds, still debeaked, drugged, and ultimately killed when their productivity declines. Foer then turns to pigs, animals that even generations of traditional farmers recognized as remarkably intelligent, playful, and social, capable of learning tricks, recognizing individuals, even using primitive tools. Yet in factory farms, their intelligence becomes a source of deeper suffering. The vast majority of breeding sows spend their pregnancies confined in gestation crates, metal and concrete cages barely larger than their own bodies, unable even to turn around. They stand and lie on slatted floors above their own waist. They develop painful sores, weakened bones, and often show signs of severe psychological distress, obsessively biting bars or displaying learned helplessness. Foer notes the hopeful sign that several states have started phasing out these crates due to public pressure, but the practice remains overwhelmingly dominant. When it's time to give birth, to farrow in industry speak, sows get moved to equally restrictive farrowing crates, supposedly to prevent them from crushing their piglets. Foer challenges this rationale, pointing out that in systems like Paul Willis's, which we'll meet later, where sows have actual space, bedding, and aren't severely stressed, crushing piglets isn't really a significant problem. The crate addresses an issue largely created by the system itself. Piglets born in these systems face their own ordeal. Within days, their tails get cut off, their needle teeth clipped, and males get castrated, all typically without any anesthetic. Why? To prevent tail biting and aggression caused by the unnatural crowding and stress, and to alter the taste of the meat for consumers. Piglets who don't grow fast enough, the runts, often get killed by being swung headfirst against concrete floors, a practice brutally termed thumping. One worker described finding piglets still alive after thumping, running around with an eyeball hanging down the side of their face. The environmental consequences are absolutely staggering, particularly the waste. Foer uses Smithfield Foods, the world's largest pork producer, as an example. Annually, Smithfield's hogs produce fecal waste equivalent to the entire human populations of California and Texas combined. Let that sink in. And this isn't just normal manure. It contains pathogens, heavy metals, antibiotics, and even dead piglets and afterbirths. This toxic slurry often gets stored in vast open-air pits called lagoons, sometimes the size of multiple football fields, which frequently leak or overflow, polluting rivers and groundwater. Foer recounts this horrific story of 5 family members dying after falling into a Michigan lagoon while attempting rescues. When these lagoons fill up, the The waste sometimes gets sprayed onto fields, creating literal fecal mists that have been linked to severe respiratory problems and other illnesses in nearby communities. Smithfield has been hit with massive fines for pollution, including a spill twice the size of the Exxon Valdez disaster, yet these fines often get treated as just another cost of doing business, dwarfed by the company's profits. Foer extends his investigation underwater, describing aquaculture fish farming as essentially underwater factory farming. Farmed fish like salmon get crowded into pens, suffering from filthy water. Parasites like sea lice that can literally eat flesh down to the bone, causing death crowns and chronic stress. But are wild-caught fish any better? Foer examines the dominant methods. Longline fishing uses lines up to 75 miles long with thousands of hooks, indiscriminately killing millions of non-target animals. The bycatch, like sharks, turtles, dolphins, and seabirds each year. Then there's trawling, especially for shrimp, which basically scrapes the ocean floor, destroying entire ecosystems and discarding 80 to 90% or more of its catch as bycatch. It's the marine equivalent of clear-cutting a rainforest to catch a few specific birds. Whether farmed or wild-caught, Foer concludes, no fish gets a good death. They suffocate, get crushed, bleed out, or get gutted while still conscious. The journey to the slaughterhouse is brutal for all factory-farmed animals. Foer describes the transport: crowded trucks, exposure to freezing cold or scorching heat, deprivation of food and water, broken bones. He details the process for cattle, the knocking box, the stun gun that frequently fails, leaving animals conscious as they get shackled, hoisted upside down, bled, skinned, and dismembered. He shares these harrowing testimonies from workers gathered by investigator Gail Eisnitz and others, cows crying out, kicking wildly as their legs get cut off, trying desperately to climb walls, even giving birth on the kill floor only to have the calf ripped out. Workers describe becoming desensitized, even sadistic, sticking electric prods in eyes, or cutting off a conscious pig's nose and rubbing salt in the wound. These aren't necessarily isolated incidents of individual cruelty, Foer argues, but systemic problems resulting from immense line speeds, poor training, lack of real oversight, and the fundamental treatment of animals as objects rather than beings. Even Temple Grandin, a renowned animal welfare expert who designs slaughterhouses, found deliberate cruelty occurring regularly in a third of plants she audited, and significant problems with stunning in many more. Amidst this bleak landscape, Foer seeks out the alternatives, the people trying to do things differently. He spends time with Frank Reese, possibly the last independent poultry farmer in America, preserving heritage breeds, turkeys and chickens with traditional genetics, capable of mating naturally, roaming actual pastures, and possessing strong immune systems without requiring constant drug interventions. Frank speaks lovingly about his birds, personalities, their curiosity, their vocabulary of sounds. He insists on humane transport and slaughter, paying significantly extra for slower, more careful processing. Yet even Frank faces immense hurdles: the lack of infrastructure like independent hatcheries and small slaughterhouses, which have been systematically dismantled or bought out by large corporations over decades. He visits Bill Nyman and Nicolette Hahn Nyman at Nyman Ranch, known for its network of small farmers raising cattle and pigs more humanely, often on pasture or in deep bedding, without routine antibiotics or hormones, and with real attention to animal welfare standards. Nicolette, ironically a vegetarian rancher herself, argues passionately that raising animals for food can be honorable if they're given lives with actual joy and an easy death, contrasting it sharply with the factory system that systematically robs animals of everything. Bill speaks of the troubling moment at slaughter, the weight of exercising dominion. Yet even here, compromises exist: branding cattle, which Foer questions as unnecessary cruelty justified mainly by tradition, castration without anesthetic, and finishing cattle on feedlots, albeit better ones than industrial standards. Foer later includes this crucial, sobering update: Bill Nyman himself eventually got forced out of his own company, reportedly because the board wanted to prioritize profit over ethics, suggesting just how difficult it is to maintain integrity within the current economic system. Bill himself said he would no longer eat Niman Ranch beef after that. Even more alarming is the connection to pandemics. Foer recounts the story of the deadly 1918 Spanish flu, now known to have originated from birds. Scientists overwhelmingly agree that factory farms, particularly massive poultry and pig operations, create the absolute perfect conditions for viruses to mutate rapidly and jump between species, causing zoonotic diseases. The H1N1 swine flu, he notes, originated in U.S. hog factory farms where bird, pig, and human viruses first combined into something new and dangerous. Health authorities warn repeatedly that another major pandemic isn't a question of if, but when, and factory farming represents one of the primary risk factors. He quotes this stark assessment: "Our choice is simple: cheap chicken or our health." Foer reflects deeply on the role of storytelling and language in all of this. How words like processing sanitize the reality of slaughter. How labels systematically mislead consumers. How the industry promotes nostalgic images of idyllic family farms that bear absolutely no resemblance to reality. He revisits his grandmother's story, her refusal to eat pork even to save her life during the war, uttering those profound words, "If nothing matters, there's nothing to save." This becomes a touchstone for Foer throughout the book, the idea that our choices about food are deeply, inextricably connected to what we hold sacred, what actually matters to us. He considers the common argument that eating meat is simply natural, countering that much of human progress involves deliberately transcending what's merely natural. He questions the feeding the world justification, arguing factory farming arose primarily from a drive for corporate profit, not humanitarian necessity, and is actually incredibly inefficient, using vast amounts of grain and water that could instead feed hungry humans directly. Ultimately, Foer arrives at his own conclusion. Having witnessed the reality firsthand, having truly looked, he finds he simply cannot participate in the factory farm system anymore. For him personally, the only realistic way to completely opt out is vegetarianism. This isn't necessarily presented as some universal mandate for everyone, but as his personal response to what he learned, a way to align his daily actions with his conscience, to avoid the forgetting that the system absolutely depends on. He acknowledges the real loss involved, the taste, the cultural connections, the traditions. But he suggests new traditions can be formed, new stories can be told. He deeply admires farmers like Frank Reese, and actively supports their efforts to create genuinely better alternatives, even helping Frank plan for a more humane slaughterhouse. He sees real value in both the vegetarian path and the path of the truly conscientious omnivore, striving for what he calls a wiser animal agriculture. Both approaches, he suggests, represent strategies aimed at fundamentally reducing violence, at challenging the dominant narrative of waging war against animals that factory farming represents. The book ends poignantly, with Foer contemplating his son's first Thanksgiving where he's old enough to eat solid food. Should they serve turkey? He contrasts the romanticized Norman Rockwell image of the holiday with the reality of the 45 million turkeys consumed that day. Birds that never saw the sky, couldn't reproduce naturally, were pumped full of drugs. He suggests that perhaps choosing not to eat the turkey could actually be a more profound way of expressing genuine thanks, a more deliberate act of choosing conscience over convenience. He leaves the reader sitting with the weight of knowledge, posing the question that echoes his grandmother's wartime choice. Now that we know the truth about eating animals, what matters enough for us to save? Reading Eating Animals feels like having bright lights suddenly switched on in a room you thought you knew intimately. Suddenly you see corners you never noticed before, dust you'd been ignoring, complex machinery whirring just beneath the surface. Jonathan Safran Foer doesn't just dump information on you. He takes you on his deeply personal quest to understand the story behind our food, and in doing so, basically forces us to confront our own stories, our own choices, our own convenient blind spots. The most powerful takeaway is probably this staggering disconnect between the idyllic images we comfortably hold about farming and the harsh, industrialized reality of the modern factory farm. The sheer scale of it all. 50 billion factory-farmed birds worldwide each year, waste lagoons larger than casinos, animals genetically engineered in ways that guarantee suffering is almost impossible to truly wrap your head around. But Foer makes it viscerally real, not just through mind-numbing statistics, but through specific descriptions, worker testimonies that are hard to forget, and his own genuinely unsettling nighttime visits. He reminds us that behind sanitized industry terms like broiler, layer, or processing are actual living beings capable of real suffering, and a system that often treats both animals and human workers with shocking disregard. What makes this book so compelling, though, is that it's not just another activist exposé wagging its finger at you. It's a profound meditation on memory, tradition, and responsibility. Foer's obvious love for his grandmother, his genuine desire to be a thoughtful father. These deeply human concerns anchor the entire investigation in relatable experience. He honestly acknowledges the real pleasure and cultural significance of eating meat, which makes his ultimate conclusions feel earned rather than preachy or dogmatic. He forces us to ask genuinely uncomfortable questions. Why is taste so often completely exempted from ethical consideration? Where's the integrity in happily paying others to do things we'd never do ourselves? How much suffering are we actually willing to tolerate, to be complicit in, for our food? The book highlights the immense, often unrecognized power we hold as consumers. The entire system, Foer argues convincingly, relies fundamentally on our participation, often on our willful ignorance. But just as our choices prop up the current system, different choices can actively shape a different future. Supporting farmers like Frank Reese, who are doing things the harder way, demanding real transparency from producers, reducing our consumption of factory-farmed products, or choosing vegetarianism, these aren't just personal dietary quirks. They're ethical and political acts with genuinely far-reaching consequences for animal welfare, environmental health, and even human health, especially concerning antibiotic resistance and the looming threat of pandemics. So what can you, as a curious and ambitious person navigating the modern world, actually take away from all this? First, simply become aware. Pay genuine attention to where your food comes from. Read labels carefully. Ask questions that might be uncomfortable. Look beyond slick packaging and marketing. Knowledge is genuinely the first step toward making conscious choices, instead of just defaulting to convenience. Second, consider starting with small, manageable changes. You don't have to revolutionize everything overnight or become some perfect ethical eater. Maybe try incorporating more plant-based meals into your week. Or commit to seeking out meat from sources you can actually trust and verify, even if it means eating significantly less of it. Every single meal is an opportunity to vote with your fork for the kind of world you want to live in. Third, share the story. Talk about these issues with your friends, your family, even when it feels awkward. The secrecy shrouding the factory farm system absolutely thrives in silence and social taboos against discussing uncomfortable food realities. Breaking that silence, simply sharing what you've learned, can be surprisingly powerful. Remember, as Foer emphasizes, we don't eat in isolation. Our choices ripple outward, influencing others, shifting norms. Eating animals isn't an easy read emotionally. It challenges deeply ingrained habits and comfortable assumptions we rely on. But it's an essential read for anyone who, well, eats. It equips us not just with disturbing facts, but with an actual framework for thinking ethically about one of the most fundamental, unavoidable aspects of our daily lives. It reminds us that our choices genuinely matter, that compassion is a muscle that grows stronger with deliberate use, and that the stories we tell ourselves about our food ultimately become the stories we tell about ourselves and what we value. That was a summary of Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer. We've journeyed through the core ideas and the emotional heart of this compelling book today. But let me be really clear about something. Hearing me talk about it is like looking at a postcard of a vast, intricate landscape. A summary gives you the outline, the major landmarks, maybe a sense of the terrain, but it can't replicate the experience of actually walking that ground yourself, feeling it beneath your feet. The true power of Foer's work lies in his personal reflections, the specific encounters that stay with you, the particular way he weaves together history, philosophy, and on-the-ground investigation. This overview exists to help you gauge whether this exploration resonates with something in you. If you felt even a spark of curiosity, a tug of conscience, or just a genuine desire to understand your plate a little better, then I honestly encourage you to pick up the actual book. Reading it isn't just about absorbing information, it's an experience, one that might fundamentally shift how you view the simple, yet surprisingly profound, act of eating. If this journey through Foer's investigation brought you some value today, maybe sparked a new thought or question you hadn't considered, please consider liking this summary and subscribing to the channel. We explore transformative books like this regularly, aiming to uncover wisdom from influential thinkers, and I'd genuinely be honored to have you join us as we continue learning and growing together.